Yep. Okay. So I'd like to call to order the meeting of the presentation for the Lenox Public Schools Strategic Plan. And on the screen, you'll see the 14 people who were instrumental in working over the last 22 months in creating this plan. We have 3 school committee members, 4 members of the public, 4 parents, and 3 faculty members. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we got here. And we had a strategic plan back in 1984. This next plan wasn't written for 30 years, and that was it started in 2012, early 2013. And that plan ran from 2015 to 2020. When that was coming to a conclusion, or nearly coming to conclusion, the school committee decided to create a successor plan. And I took on the task of coordinating that and getting the committee put together and arranging the meetings and all. So we met roughly every 3 weeks from that point on. Summers maybe like once a month, but we were pretty diligent about meeting pretty regularly. We conducted the most recent survey in the fall of 2019. There were around 220 or 30 participants. The school committee, the planning committee synthesized those results and identified themes. And during that time frame, we ended up splitting into 4 groups, which you'll hear from tonight, and they're on the screen. Strategies were developed by the subgroups and vetted by the full strategic plan committee. And the full school committee had opportunities to react to the draft version from January to March. We did get feedback that we had not included much about COVID and how COVID was going to affect the return to school in the fall. And the committee decided that rather than having a separate strategy for that aspects of it would be picked up through the academic journey, curriculum instruction section, as well as the mental health section. And we did have in the narrative, we do include some aspects of that. We have a little bit of narrative section about that. Each of the strategies includes a narrative section, then a theory of action. If we do this, then this will happen. The strategy itself. We put some suggested action steps and in some cases suggested measures of success in, although we understand that really the administration will sit and wrestle with the strategies and the action steps. But in each case, in each of the 8 strategies, we have developed quite a few potential action steps. And it would be up to the administration to figure out, which strategies get most immediate priority, which ones can be put off, because 8 strategies would be an enormous number to be working on simultaneously. So all of this work resulted in the 2021-2026 strategic plan. So the protocols for tonight, first off, there'll be a presentation about the demographics that Orrin Cass had put together. This presentation, as well as each strategy presentation, will be about 5 minutes long. There are 3 of the areas that we might allow a little bit more time. After each of the strategies has been presented, there'll be an opportunity for questions, but very limited, perhaps 2 to 3 minutes of questioning time, because we have a lot to cover tonight, and our plan is to try to get the meeting completed by 8:30. Questioners will need to identify themselves, and I will act as kind of a gatekeeper to try to make that happen. In terms of giving you permission to speak and also putting your picture up on the screen. It's also suggested, however, since we can't respond to all questions, that you type your question into the question section of the webinar. And if my ability with technology allows me to do this, we'll try to collect any unanswered questions for a later response, by the committee, but not, perhaps at the close of the meeting if there's time, although it looks like our time might go right to the end. So that's where we stand in terms of the logistics. So please, if you have a question, we do want you to identify who you are, and we will do our very best to try to answer as many questions as we can. So that said, we're going to move on to the presentation by Oren Cass on the demographics.
All right. Have I made it on?
You are.
Excellent. Well, I guess, first of all, I will sort of start on behalf of the group in thanking Bob for herding us cats for a very long period of time. I think he has had to put in multiples of effort on what the rest of us have done, and really, I think, done a terrific job keeping the process moving forward. So thank you for that, Bob. I want to just speak for a few minutes about some work that we did that's not one of the strategies, but is a question that I think is always at the top of folks' mind in Lenox, which is just what's going on with enrollment. What is happening with the demographics in our town, and do we have enough students to support the programs as we're currently operating them? I think one thing we asked about in the survey and came through very clearly in the responses is that residents really value Lenox having its own school district, but we also really value being able to offer an incredibly broad range of programs to students. And so to do both those things, we have to make sure we have enough students coming through the pipeline. I think as we looked at the data, really kind of going back over the past 10 years and then modeling out into the future what we can expect, there are three things that really jumped out. One is something that demographers know and always say, which is that shifts take a really long time to happen. So I think folks have seen, for instance, the increase in population this past year, and that's certainly very encouraging. But it would take roughly 20 years like that to reverse the declines of the past 20 years. And the students that we already have in second grade, 10 years from now, that will still be the set of students who are then in our 12th grade. And so as you look at what's happening, what you find at any point in time is we have kids leaving our system because they graduate from 12th grade. How many kids leave is dependent on how many kids were entering more than a decade ago. And so, back in 2007, 2008, we had significantly more kids entering the system. So a starting class might be up in the range of 40 students. And so that means that today, when a class graduates, we have 40 Lenox resident students leaving. And we look particularly at resident because we have the ability to increase or decrease the number of choice students, but we can't control how many resident students we have. And so we're at a place right now where in each given year, we have a large cohort of resident students graduating who have been through the system for a decade now, and a smaller number entering. So we typically have maybe 25 or 27 new kindergartners. And so what that means is every year we see enrollment go down a little. 40 kids go out one end, only 25 come in the other end. And that's something we can expect to continue happening for a number of years still, as some of those larger, older classes leave, even as we have smaller classes coming in. And so the bad news is we should expect to see some decline in our enrollment. The good news is that even though enrollment seems to be declining, we actually are at a very steady state. So it's not like our kindergarten cohorts are getting smaller. Over the last 5 or so years, and based on the birth data we have, it looks like we have a very steady and healthy cohort of incoming students. And so for the long term, the good news is it seems like we certainly have enough students coming into the system to support the kinds of programs we want. The last thing I'll point out is the sort of explicit recommendation we make for the committee, which is how to kind of look at and study the problem going forward. And what we recommend is certainly, of course, to keep track of the total size of the student body and whether it's getting bigger or smaller. But really, the two most important things to look at are, number one, how many kindergartners do we have coming in each year? And is that a steady number, or is that getting bigger? And then number two, what's happening in all of the grades in the middle? So are we, as you look at the kids moving from first to second grade, moving from seventh to eighth grade, at those stages, do we tend to gain kids or do we tend to lose kids? And lately we've been gaining kids, and that's terrific. And as long as we have the kindergartners we have coming in, as long as we hold steady or gain kids in the middle, we'll have a very healthy system. If we either see that incoming set of kindergartners start to drop down to 20 or below 20, that would be a real concern. And if we start to see that we're losing kids in the middle, so of everybody who starts, they actually start to leave for other places along the way, that would be a real problem as well. And so those are the two things we think are important to look at. And as long as they look good, we think we can certainly over the next 5 years feel very good about the demographics. So Bob, I don't know if there are any questions on that, or otherwise I can start to pass it along.
There are no questions that are posed at the moment.
All right.
So
in that case, I think I hand it over to Peter and Kim to talk about the first topic area.
Thank you, Warren. I just wanted to thank our subcommittee, Gigi Oblonsky, Robert Fuster, Kim, and for all of your work. Over the past few years, our subcommittee looked at the 2019 survey and the most recent NEASC accreditation study. And both of those identified, in fact, a number of strengths regarding our district curriculum and instruction, strengths of which I think we can say and be rightly proud of. In the next 5 years and beyond, fostering and enhancing a rigorous, adaptable, inclusive, and innovative curriculum in all subject areas and supported by the highest quality of instruction lies at the heart of providing for the most important goal of our district: to educate each student academically, intellectually, socially, and emotionally. We will continue to cultivate and implement an independently designed, responsibly grounded curricula that continually seeks to provide students with deeper understanding and critical and creative thinking skills, authentic learning experiences, varied and equitable opportunities, individual choices, and an informed and an ethical education. The survey and the NEASC report also showed that ensuring the highest level of instruction over the next 5 years throughout our district is dependent upon a number of factors. It must take place in safe and comfortable surroundings, respond to individual student needs at each grade level, be grounded in the district's core values, beliefs, and learning expectations, and flourish in a collaborative atmosphere at all levels within the district. It necessitates directed and relevant professional development programs that address, deepen, and inform the needs of students and teachers alike. It requires exceptional classroom spaces, materials, and technologies, all within classrooms of limited numbers of students. It responds to the needs of all students and prepares them equally in their choices after high school to pursue careers, post-secondary education, the military, or service. And lastly, finally, it ensures that the arts in all their forms, from woodworking to fine arts, CAD, music, and our drama program, remain central to the identity of our schools.
When we took a look at the survey results, some of the most common responses included asking our subcommittee to note the importance of revisiting homework policies, adequacy of rest, play, outside time for students, engagement of advanced students at the elementary level, and school start times to maximize student engagement and contentment. As our subcommittee met throughout the last year plus, another topic of importance emerged, especially in light of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. We also had students present in the summer of 2020 on experiences of racism in the district schools. And our superintendent wrote a letter supporting a refocusing or a new focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion in our public school district. And so in response to that, our committee embarked on some research with regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion in Lenox Public Schools. We interviewed select faculty, alumni of color, and parents of students of color to guide our inquiry and identify priorities that we might have moving forward in this arena. We also embarked on a comparative study of 8 Massachusetts public school districts to see where Lenox measured up when it came to strategies and initiatives regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it became clear that the Lenox Public School District was quite behind. And so, while the Lenox Public Schools have been successful in creating an array of opportunities, when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion for all students and faculty alike, our school district, we determined, is in need of improvement in its curriculum, instruction, and school culture when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We wanted to come up with a common language for purposes of discussion. And so diversity comes in many forms, including race and ethnicity, gender and gender identity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, language, culture, national origin, religious commitments, age, ability or disability status, and political perspective. Ensuring our schools are places where differences are welcomed, different perspectives are respectfully heard, and every student and staff member feels a sense of belonging is inclusion. Equity is actively challenging and responding appropriately to discrimination, bias, and harassment while ensuring equal opportunity for all students and staff. When it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion in our curriculum and instruction, the Lenox Public Schools can improve by helping current students grapple and become familiar with diverse values, priorities, and perspectives through activities and curricula featuring manifold voices, and through a program of ongoing relevant professional development to support and engage teachers in this work. The path toward greater equity in education does start early in the elementary grades, where inclusive teaching styles, authentic assessment, diverse curricula, and work to eliminate implicit bias in the classroom work together to support an equitable path for all students moving forward. Yet that work cannot be left only to the lower grades. It must continue at all district levels in order for equity in education to persist. Through the development of a diverse integrated K-12 curriculum, instruction that is inclusive and equitable, and a school culture focused on inclusion and respect, we can move our district schools beyond a beginning interest in diversity, equity, and inclusion and toward a concrete program supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion as key to the district's educational mission. Such a program will better engage all Lenox Public School students and prepare them for the futures they pursue. We did have a couple of action steps that we identified through this process, in particular through our interviews with the aforementioned stakeholders in our school district. And a couple highlights include reassessing the equitable translation, outreach, and other needs of our LEP families at all levels, as well as reviewing and using relevant data to inform a plan to improve the diversity, socioeconomically and otherwise, of Lenox Public Schools honors and advanced placement classes. And a review of our curriculum to ensure that it's vertically and horizontally integrated, so across all grades, but also within subject matter. So a student in kindergarten is starting to learn certain content that will be built upon as they move forward from this lens. And so we have other action steps that we suggested, but of course, as Bob mentioned, it'll be the administration's and faculty's role to determine what's most appropriate for their particular schools and the district itself.
Okay.
So I think that's our presentation, Bob.
Okay, and we do have Mary O'Brien has her hand raised, and Mary, you have permission to talk.
It looks like she's muted from, I don't know if she's trying to talk, but I see a mute sign under attendees.
Mary, if you have a question, why don't you type it into the question box and we can come back to it. Okay, then moving on. I guess it's my turn.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so on the leadership section, both historically with the survey back in 2013, as well as the survey in 2019, there are mixed messages about leadership. There's a concern that many decisions are made top down, either at the building level or at the district level. We've had many people feel they have great access to the administrators, but decision making has already been determined by when you have committee work. The outcomes are not really involving all participants. The outcomes may be already in the leadership's mind prior to the meetings. So there was also, we have a lot of distributive leadership positions, and the difference that we want to articulate tonight is that while we have a lot of distributive leadership, department heads, team leaders in special education, and whatever, what we don't seem to have, at least that we knew of in writing the plan, was collaborative leadership, where you've got a group of educators meeting together, working for the best interests of the instructional program. And yeah, I know that some of our principals have had experience leading leadership teams in other districts. And we feel that an elected instructional leadership team meeting regularly and identifying key pedagogical issues and policy, enacting policies, programs, and priorities that address student needs would be a benefit to the district, because we can no longer really rely on, while we have, for example, department heads at the high school, that would be a logical group of people to be meeting as an instructional leadership team also, but they tend, I believe, to be more department oriented. And so empowering them to be more of a school-wide leadership team is what we believe would be helpful in moving the district forward. We did identify, I think, 10 different groups that meet regularly. But as I said, while we have the district admin team, building support teams, head teachers, department chairs, middle school teams, and so on, we don't feel that the collaboration aspect of there is there. So that's basically what we're pushing for here. I'm just going to check and see if there are any questions. Okay, I still don't see any questions. So if people do have questions, either type them into the box or raise your hand. I still see Mary O'Brien's hand raised. But again, Mary, if you're hearing this, type your question into the Q&A box and we'll get to it. Does anybody have any questions on the leadership section? Okay, moving on then, we'll move on to the facilities section, which is Ben, Molly, and Christine.
Hi, everyone. Again, I just wanted to thank, my subcommittee on the, it includes Mike Jackson, who's Director of Technology. I'm Ben Weaver, teacher in the high school. Mike Jackson's going to speak next. He's the Director of Technology, so he's going to, of course, speak about technology. And also Christine Morrow and Molly Ellett, school committee members, we all worked collaboratively. I would say we did have leadership as one of our topics, but I want to thank Bob, who, as many have mentioned, took that on because he had a wealth of kind of experience, and I think we really appreciate him taking care of that. So I'm just going to address facilities and keep it, I think, fairly simple as a topic. And I'm going to outline things and then turn it over to Mike Jackson. So while there's already a process in place for in the Lenox Public Schools for considering capital projects related to facilities, that's something that already exists. All of the things that you've heard discussed tonight, the Endicott survey, the NEAS self-study, our survey from the Strategic Planning Committee, raised significant concerns about the buildings. At the time that the surveys and self-study were being conducted, of course, there were structural issues at LMMHS that were noted by many. This is the kind of foundation issues from several years ago. Of course, we're all quite familiar with the recent abatement issues, but in those surveys and self-study, issues were also raised specifically about science labs. We'll keep technology aside from it because I think that relates to Mr. Jackson here in a second, but science labs. And then in the middle and high school, especially the idea of classroom space, like while we're trying to offer a quite demanding curricular and co-curricular program, the fact that there's a limited amount of classroom space to deliver that. We question I think the question that we raised from the surveys, the question that the respondents were raising was whether or not we could offer the things that we pride ourselves in that you've heard discussed tonight, an excellent, but also an innovative, a flexible, both for academic and co-curricular program. So while there's a process in place for considering capital projects, that's an annual, part of running the school. We felt that, and I think this is a larger strategic planning committee, feels that the leadership of the district in this plan should recognize, have on one of its sort of metaphorical front burners, some plan to address what many feel are crucial impending decisions about how to address what are either significant current concerns or ones that are impending, right? So if it's working right now, there's a very clear sense from a lot of stakeholders that these will become issues in the near future. We also took note, as many did who responded to us through the surveys and self-study, that this also seems like an ideal moment, right? A historical moment, that it's just that we're not sort of just going through this yearly process anymore. We have incoming leadership. There's this whole plan that's rethinking the connections between many aspects of the school, and those connections often involve facilities, right? And the facilities that then need to deliver them. And so it did seem like an opportune moment to come up with a plan. We left it quite, if those of you who had a chance to look at the more detailed narrative and action steps, we've left our recommendations pretty minimal because we realize we are in an extraordinary moment. The middle and high school was just actually going through kind of an emergency facilities concern. So we don't know what the ramifications of that are, the cost, the timing, all of that kind of stuff. That's totally up in the air. There's also the pandemic that we're in the midst of and how that's going to affect likely funding, other interests that might need to come first before this becomes one. I mean, what priority this takes, because it is such a weighty one, just sort of financially, facilities. It seems to me that we did not even feel like we had I think, if I can speak for some of my fellow members, I didn't feel like we felt it was our, it wouldn't have been helpful here to offer action steps that, if you look at them, are so quite bland. It involved, gathering information, using these surveys and self-studies, evaluating, especially in mind with other kind of prongs of the strategic plan about how addressing facilities concerns could coordinate with those. And I think that segues perfectly into the issue of technology, which is kind of adjacent to facilities here. So let me turn it over to Mike Jackson. I just want to thank everyone also on the committee, Christine and Molly and Mike and Bob in absentia in your own handling leadership. Thank you for all your work.
Thank you, Ben, and excuse me, thank you to everyone in the group. I'll start off with a bit of an apology. You have to bear with me. I've been absent from the group for about the last 7 or 9 months with everything going on with COVID. It's been a fun time to be in education technology, as it has been an interesting time to be a teacher, and every other job I can possibly think of has just been affected so much by this. So I'm going to go really just on the narrative that we wrote up here. I think they did an excellent job, and I'm going to start with I'm going to paraphrase a little bit the first 2 paragraphs, as it really kind of encapsulates where we were at with technology. So given the interwoven nature of modern educational facilities and technology, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, a strategic plan to address building concerns should do so in conjunction with a thoughtful consideration of what technology would best support the students, faculty, and staff of LPS. The technology department of LPS has a longstanding commitment to offering, within reasonable budgetary constraints, whatever tools faculty have deemed necessary to achieve high quality instruction. Indeed, the flexible and independent implementation of technology correlates with the LPS mission to empower faculty innovation and foster student engagement through individualized instruction. Nevertheless, the rapid pace of technology development, coupled with both the increased demands of state data collection and the exigencies of remote learning that are likely to be in place for the foreseeable future, threatens this flexibility and independence. Several district-wide resources overlap, while the number of more specialized tools has increased exponentially in recent years, both potentially resulting in technology resources complicating rather than clarifying instruction, not to mention overburdening the current tech staff. Kind of encapsulates it. Some of the action steps that we're looking at here evaluate both short-term and long-term district school technology needs, conduct a survey of the entire school community regarding technology currently being employed. Interesting note on that, I did a quick survey of that over the summer, back in August, to try to get a grip as to where we're at. And basically through K through 12, we use over 250 different tools, softwares, and websites. And so we're getting a bit scattered in several different directions. And I think it's, at this point, kind of affecting education that kids have to learn the nuances of so many different apps and websites that we could pare that down a bit. Part of that, develop a calendar of technology improvements and expenses that balances LPS priorities and likely town and state support. Add, remove, or adjust technology resources in accordance with this calendar. Supplement ongoing technical support with additional professional development and other transition assistance in light of changes to technology resources. Evaluate impact to additions, subtractions, or adjustments to technology resources. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Okay, well, with that, I will hand off to Veronica for inclusivity.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Am I there and clear? I'm still seeing Mike, so can you all see me? Hello? Okay. Assuming that you can see me because I can't see anyone.
You're coming through great.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I can't see anyone. Okay.
Oh, right. Sorry. I keep putting my thumbs up and
No, that's all right. Hi, everybody. I'm Veronica Fenton. I share appreciation for everybody in this group, and the amount of time that we took to go through a lot of this. Strategic planning is a difficult process, and we really did try to get a lot of input from people with all aspects of our community as to what our schools need to do to improve and how do we meet the needs of many different people. In the context of this, of course, we also had to deal with the unprecedented nature of COVID and how we had to shift and our teachers and our leadership, and Mike had to shift into finding a new way to instruct and engage in education. And that's been challenging for everyone. Specifically, when we look at that, sometimes we also look at what inequities come through when you're finding out suddenly that students need to learn from home, or maybe there's family language barriers, et cetera, as opposed to students coming in and being able to be face-to-face and in the presence of their teachers in a way that they can get instruction. So that's also been something that's being looked at. Specifically under my column, and Kim did a great job of kind of highlighting where we're working on the issue of diversity, equity, inclusion. And again, very much came to the fore of more emotional and difficult conversations based upon the murder of George Floyd, but also based upon the understanding that there are people in marginalized groups who maybe have not felt heard. And I think our focus on this particular area is that we all need to engage in more productive learning around what it means to be an inclusive education system. So as Kim defined, both relative to diversity and inclusivity, it is not merely along the lines of race, although race is really a very, very important and pivotal issue for us to look at, because in many situations we are, primarily dealing with a community that does not have a lot of people of color amongst our midst. I mean, we all may have friends or we have people that we know, but we don't always get to know one another in a way that feels genuine and real. And so I think it's important that, and we talked as a group about the importance of having better understanding and training around why it is that our communities still remain somewhat segregated and somewhat very much with some people feeling like they're not included. In the last several years, we've had challenges that have been identified by students that had not previously been identified before, where students actually were targets of very overt racist acts. And that's definitely not something that we as a community want. But the question is whether or not we've dealt with it appropriately. So we are, very much focused on the identifying the specific need of more overt, very direct action around the issue of making sure that all students feel welcome and heard and part of our community. So some you've heard about relative to direct instruction and curriculum. I mean, that's obviously extremely important by looking at lots of different points of view. But how are we actually acting as a community to protect and stand up for people who've been marginalized? And I would say to you that I think in some of our action steps, and I can highlight a few of them, it's just, it's really important that we all maybe gain some tools around that. I think it's hard. We don't want to think that someone's being harmed, but to the extent that we as adults aren't modeling good behavior for students around how to disrupt and intervene when someone's being harmed, whether it's bullying because of body stereotyping, LGBTQ, race, or just general, really unkind behavior. We have had as a priority in the last 10 to 15 years, as long as I can remember, an anti-bullying programming, but it doesn't seem to still be getting to the heart of the issue. So I think what that says is we got to dig in deeper, and we all can benefit from training and understanding and conversation around how to create communities that are inclusive. I think that also includes inclusivity, also includes inclusive classrooms, recognizing all learners. And as a conversation within Lenox, I think is this concept that although we're really proud of the fact that our students get prepared for a top college education, we need to also recognize that not that all students don't necessarily strive for that. It's not what they want. They are not lesser because they choose to do a trade, become a police officer, a fireman, or something that does not involve a 4-year college education or graduate program. So when we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, we're also thinking about welcoming all types of learners and all types of people into our community and the ways that we learn from each other. And I think that does take some more overt work. We did identify that we felt sometimes the issues that were pretty strongly either bullying or racist behaviors or other types of harmful behaviors were not addressed directly. So one of our goals is to both empower our community and our students to be able to create opportunities to come together and say, we are not going to allow this. So how are we coming together as a community to protect and stand up for people who are marginalized? And if we're not giving our students tools, I mean, you often hear the words allies or allyship. If we're not teaching our students how to stand up for others, they're missing out on an opportunity as they go into the world. And maybe we're not doing great in standing up for others because we're nervous or we're not sure what to say, we're not sure how to deal with it. And I think there's many opportunities for us to engage both in an education community, meaning specifically the staff and the students in our schools, but also within our community of parents and other support people who can engage in this, whether it's through book learning, speakers, et cetera. But we don't want to only do this like, oh, we're going to have an assembly and now we're going to talk about it. What we recognize is that that's just not deep enough and we're not getting to the heart of the problem. So very specifically talking about the need to have our incident reports, which are part of our policies, to actually be written and to be followed through with in a way that makes accountability for harmful speech and actions against others. And that also we have accountability if that's not being done, because sometimes it feels like maybe it's being pushed aside or there's not full accountability measures. We're aware of some specific incidents in which that's happened. And then we also want, as I said, to have student-led processes. How are students engaging as leaders and stepping up? And not always the kids that sometimes we see the same kids always in leadership, but how are we bringing out other people who really want to engage in learning the process of creating solutions in order to create the kind of community that we want? How are students engaged in that? Is it the principal or the assistant principal or the guidance counselor saying, hey, kids, this is going to happen? Or hey, parents, this is going to happen? Or are the students actually involved in learning the skills? And that will actually enhance their ability as they graduate from Lenox to take those skills with them. Are we modeling good behaviors as adults? And are we then giving our students the tools to be able to create the same types of inclusive communities, which is essential. It's essential for them as human beings in the world, as people who are considered to be, well educated. And education, again, doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be deciding to go to an Ivy League college. It means that you're a person that's engaging in community and you're able to do that in a productive and healthy and supportive way. That also includes the ability to debate. So we talk sometimes about academic communities and whether students have to follow sort of a certain way of thinking. Obviously, harmful behavior and actions is not really debatable. But being able to talk about policies, ideas, I mean, that's what we often talk about when we talk about freedom, education, is to be able to say, was this right or was this wrong? How can we think about how politics works? How do we think about how town government works? I mean, ways in which our students can understand the world around them, discuss it, debate it, and have those tools to think critically, examine media, for example. Many students are getting a lot of information from social media. How are we empowering them to really dig in and understand facts versus fiction, propaganda versus truth? And how do they then identify that with their own beliefs, which of course, whether that includes political beliefs, religious beliefs, as long as those beliefs aren't saying I have the right to be harmful to someone, because that's not where we're headed with this. But students need skills to be able to debate and have discourse and discuss a variety of topics, as do we all. I think that covers kind of where we're at. And like I said, really wanting to engage not just in a school community, but an entire community, and then bringing us from K through 12, and really also being able to have students examine various ways of art and expression and seeing various within their curriculum, various points of view and voices is also extremely important. And I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Ronnie. Let me just jump in here for a second and just let people know who may have joined us late that, we are allowing questions at the end of each presentation if you have questions, as well as I think we'll have time at the end of the meeting. You can also type questions into the question and answer section of the webinar. So I don't see any questions right at the moment. No one's got their hand raised, but so I guess we can move on.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ronnie. I'm Erica Shepherdson, and I'm going to be presenting the mental health section of our strategic plan. This section was informed, of course, by the initial strategic plan survey, and which identified more social emotional supports, both personnel and services. This area was also informed by student advocates from LMMHS who attended one of our meetings and offered their student voices and perspectives. And it was informed by knowledge of current practices within Lenox Public Schools. And lastly, the mental health section was informed by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education's guidance and standards. So the following information I'm going to share is in the strategic plan for you to reference. In regard to mental health, we know that there are many factors that affect students' mental health, and that mental health and student well-being go hand in hand. So a culturally responsive, safe, and supportive learning environment is critical and essential to positive student outcomes. In order for students to understand and value mental health, policy and practice must prioritize the impact of this area of student development on academic outcomes. To destigmatize mental health goes beyond social emotional curriculums and periodic professional development. Destigmatizing mental health involves utilizing licensed mental health professionals as staff and as collaborative partners. It involves open dialogues and partnerships with families on how to best support students in the school learning environment and in the wraparound network within our homes and community. As noted earlier in the plan under the COVID-19 concerns, it will be critical to continue identifying and addressing mental health challenges triggered or exacerbated by the pandemic. Current protocols and structures should be assessed with staff, parent, and student surveys utilized to determine the full extent of additional supports and action plans that may be necessary to adequately support the re-engagement of students. And you can see, oh, actually, Bob, you scrolled past my theory of action and strategy. But just to recap that, if Lenox Public Schools improves access to mental health supports, moving it from a place of stigma to a core component of student well-being, the educational outcomes and learning environment of all Lenox Public School students will be enhanced, both in the larger school climate and via individual outcomes of behavior and emotional well-being. In promoting social and emotional competency, it will build resilience in students that directly and indirectly impacts their academic outcomes. And the overarching strategy being that social emotional competencies through inclusive instruction and by integrating social and emotional learning into classroom instruction through multi-tiered systems of support. And so I also included some potential action steps, but like other presenters mentioned, of course, that will be at the discretion of administration and leadership. And in this case, I'm sure the school adjustment counselors and director of student services would weigh in. But I think two big highlights would be to continue the consistent use of multi-tiered systems of student support, from universal school-wide instruction for all students to special consideration of historically marginalized populations. And that with reinstatement of the district's social emotional task force with school counselors, school psychologists, school adjustment counselors, school nurse, and other stakeholders, some of the other action plans would fall potentially to that task force in terms of evaluating school climate and gathering data on current social emotional practices and what the changing needs are for student support and services. Also, there's some consideration for using web pages with links for social emotional resources for family, including community mental health links. And last but not least, evaluating the expansion of social emotional personnel and resources, including collaboration with outside resources, persons, or agencies, which could be funded through grants or third-party billing as a budget option. So in summary, addressing mental health at Lenox Public Schools involves a continued willingness to ask questions, listen for answers, and collaborate on solutions. Thank you. And I think David is up if no one has any questions.
Okay, I guess no questions, yes? I'm representing a 3-member subcommittee that included Bob Vaughn, Tom Romeo, and myself. And we looked at human resources development and financial support in the district. One of the issues that was identified was the quality level of professional development. So we defined a process to make continuous learning for staff more meaningful and valuable. This effort is important because standard analyses of educational outcomes point out the direct link between student achievement and teacher quality. So it's critical that education stakeholders do what's necessary to make sure that staff are continuously improving their subject knowledge and the manner in which they teach their disciplines, as well as their understanding of the young learners they instruct and mentor. The focus on professional development improvements also has its origins in the strategic plan survey to faculty and staff that was distributed in the earliest stages of this strategic planning process. Among the survey responses, many were critical of the activities directed by the district, as well as those targeted by the state and federal authorities. In fact, 55% of staff respondents acknowledged that the professional development that had been offered in the past failed to match staff learning needs. There are a number of possible explanations for this mismatch between needs and typical professional development activities, including that every teacher and staff member possesses unique strengths and weaknesses, and that thereby personalizes the perception of their need. Individual subjects are taught using distinctive instructional methods, often involving unique subtleties and finesses. So not all staff members require identical training. And age groups learn differently because of the progressive stages of human development. So professional development efforts naturally demand some degree of customization. Additionally, we found that general dissatisfaction with the PD efforts of the past may be connected to the federal, state, and local mandates that get issued annually to address the more large-scale structural concerns that impact educational outcomes in the aggregate. Unfortunately, at times, some of these initiatives are viewed as less than relevant to personal or local demands. Because of these factors, it's often difficult to prioritize which concerns a local staff should tackle in a particular year or period of time, given that time beyond instruction and assessment is strictly limited. So to more successfully negotiate the inevitable priority differences, our strategic planning committee recommends an increase in staff influence in the professional development decisions in partnership with school and district administrators. And to achieve this goal, our group advocates that annual and long-term professional development opportunities be collaboratively developed by a joint committee of faculty and administrators. It's our belief that this structure and process will improve continuous learning outcomes because activities that are mutually agreed upon will be both helpful to teachers and consistent with the district and individual school goals, as well as the state and federal mandates. Specifically, the action steps detailed in the strategic plan include, but are not limited to, that establishment of the Joint Faculty Administration Professional Development Committee, an annual evaluation of the district and school professional development needs by that committee, the annual drafting of a professional development calendar by the committee that includes both the district's professional development, committee determined offerings, as well as any state and federal mandates, the delivery of relevant professional development activities and programs to address identified needs, and importantly, the ongoing evaluation of the quality of the professional development activities and programs, as well as the effectiveness of the Joint Committee's performance itself. The Strategic Planning Committee believes this type of joint effort is the best and most direct way to improve professional development in our district. If anyone has any questions related to professional development, I'll be happy to answer them now.
There are none listed at the moment, David, so maybe they're all waiting till we're done with the evening.
Okay, well, let me hand off the presentation to my colleague, Tom Romeo, who's going to cover the last strategy of the evening.
Hi, I'm Tom Romeo, and as David had said, I served on the subcommittee with him and Bob Vaughn. The first thing I'd like to do is, this is just to acknowledge, this is the third strategic plan that I served on for the schools, and I would just like to thank and commend all the committee members for their hard work and their leadership through Bob. They really have put in a lot of effort and I think have come up with a great plan. So I felt it necessary to say that. With respect to the finances of the school department, the goal of the Lenox School Committee is to provide the fiduciary responsibility and advocacy for a budget that supports the educational infrastructure needs of the schools. That falls within the town's ability to pay. It's important to understand that the school committee is the sole public entity responsible for approving the budget presented by the school administration. This plan, in developing this plan, the committee works with the town manager and through the finance committee and so forth and so on. However, it has to be noted that as an independent elected body, the school committee is empowered to move forward for town meeting of support with the budget it believes is necessary for the operation of the school department. That's why school town meeting presentations and budget approvals are so important. At this, as we know, during this time, dealing with the COVID situation, it has a lot of different stresses and strains on the budgets, which caused a lot of creativity and flexibility. However, looking forward, a 5-year strategic plan must also be mindful of the long-term prognosis and aspirations of the district. And we have to consider that with the expenditures and budgets going forward. Money typically allocated for capital was somewhat suspended this year because of the financial shortfalls. However, there were some other specific health and safety supplies requirements, which federal and state grants were provided to help defray some of those costs. Long term, the school committee will continue to ensure the independence of the district and respond to the ever-evolving landscape of teaching and learning and providing the resources necessary for maintaining and enhancing the Lenox Public historical outstanding outcomes. So again, the school committee is the sole body that is responsible for that budget that presents to the town. And that is why going forward, support at annual town meetings will be essential to achieve a lot of the initiatives that are outlined in this strategic plan. So if there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
Once again, Tom, I don't think there are any questions. Now, maybe
the only other thing I failed to say is that having been involved with the schools for a number of years, the town has always been extremely supportive of the schools. And I would anticipate and hope that that would continue, but they have always been extremely supportive in the most difficult times that the towns have been in.
I would concur with that, Tom. We've been working together for a long time, you and I, and we've had great support. In the 38 years I've been here, we've always had great support. What I'd like to say now is, and we'll let people formulate questions if they have them. Otherwise, we'll end in a few minutes. But I did want to just mention, with respect to some of the presentations made tonight, first off, thank you all for the work you've done. And second, we have a new superintendent coming in. Originally, this plan was intended to be completed for this school year. With COVID and everything, we kept meeting, but the fact that we had an interim superintendent, we really wanted to present this to our new permanent superintendent. And and time got away from us in some regards because of various things. But that said, new superintendent is coming in with a great background in diversity, equity, and inclusion, having been the chief officer in a district of 13,000 students for that. So we feel comfortable that we're going to have some leadership that will help support, you know, many of the goals we have. Going back to the leadership presentation that I made, one of the concerns that came out in the survey was the fact that we've had 7 superintendents or 5 superintendents over the last 13 years or whatever the exact number is. I don't know. Since 2008, we've had 2 interims and 3 other superintendents, or maybe 4, and that the district, the people responding to the survey were really looking for some stability in that regard too. And we're hopeful that that the work of the school committee this year in the hiring process that we will realize that. I mentioned at the beginning, and it was mentioned in some of the presentations, the whole COVID thing has, you know, kind of been topsy-turvy for us. But you know, Erica's presentation on mental health and the work of the other committees in addressing that, that will be foremost, I think, coming back. We know from school committee meetings that we're going to have some summer opportunities for kids to potentially close gaps that may have resulted in the learning that took place this school year, the last 16 months, as well as some possible enrichment opportunities for students. And that's in the works right now. We don't have all the details, but these principals are working on developing some programs this summer. Well, we don't want to take some of the vacation away from the kids. There may be kids, kids and families who opt for this going forward. So I think that and I think I've also said publicly a few times that 8 strategies is a lot. We don't expect that all 8 will be worked on simultaneously. Some of them would go on regardless. There would be tweaks. You're always going to be working on finance regardless. Professional development you're going to be working on, but the tweaks that we're suggesting may help improve that. So I think if you read the paper this week, I highlighted the curriculum instruction area, inclusivity, mental health, and facilities as probably 4 of the most critical areas facing us. And I think that those are likely, certainly will be rising to the highest level of priority moving forward. Not that the others won't, but some of them will work in concert. And I know in developing plans with schools for improvement over the last decade, turnaround situations, a lot of these work in, we have listed them as eight specific strategies. They work in concert, and there'll be meshing of one and another, so that it won't always seem like there are 8 separate ones. There'll be interplay between them that will be helpful. So that said, I'm going to take a look and see if there's any questions that have arisen. And I don't see any. So I think we can probably conclude our work here tonight.
Bob,
Anybody else wish to say something?
Bob, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, I just wanted there was one thing I meant to mention about facilities, just and maybe just something I would want to say. The middle and high school were back this week full time, and I just wanted to acknowledge something that we are very fortunate, even though we have a lot of questions about our facilities, we do not have any questions about the facility staff. Jeff Ano and all of his crew, I mean, their ability to go from abatement on Sunday to full-time school on Tuesday is remarkable. My closing thought about facilities is whatever decisions we make, we're really fortunate that we're going to have it in the hands of the best facilities crew I've ever been around. I've been at a lot of different schools, and I just think they deserve some recognition this week, because they really went all out. And so, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, thank you. Okay, anybody else? Okay, then I'm going to shut the recording off.